How's it going, everyone? Jiivita here with a video over testing 240. This adds some kind of interesting things and exciting features. First off, we have the new compactness system, which aims to kind of prevent abuse to the plot reservation system. If you're unfamiliar, if you meet certain criteria, you can basically have your beacon reserve the 2 plots just outside of your beacon. That way people can't come along and plot that area. It kind of ensures that you can expand later on. It also prevents other people from kind of absorbing your beacon into their settlement. However, one of the side effects of this is that players could plot in such a way that you were able to reserve massive amounts of land for a fraction of the plots. And said practice is actually now officially banned, and this new system aims to essentially prevent this problem from happening, as well as ensuring that players are using the space more efficiently. But moving along, they're adding an HTTP shopping API, which will allow an external user with a blessed key to query the world servers directly without having to be signed into the game to gather things like buy and sell prices, their location, the names of the beacons, etc. Basically, it's kind of like the shopping interface in the knowledge tree of being able to see, oh, where do I buy this item from? Except you can now do it from an external website. So that will be very nice, especially for just trying to figure out like, oh, I want to buy this, where is the cheapest price, or is it even for sale on any of the known worlds? I know there's several things I would like to buy, but I just either have to go to every single planet and check, or check the most busy planets that I can think of, and yeah, it's a little not as convenient as what this sounds like. So this should allow users to create some really cool community tools. And while we're talking about it, I'll go ahead and kind of flesh it out. I did say you have to have a blessed key. So in order to prototype and develop these tools, you can use the creative servers, which does not require a key. If you want to test these on the test servers or move them over to the live servers, then you need to request a key from the developers. And so the keys for live will only be granted to the community members that have demonstrated how the API will be used, and that usage will be shared with everybody in the community, not just shared with your buddies for an edge over everybody else. Exposing this first API aims to help the community make new tools and systems around the game, but is not to allow individual players or groups of players to have an unfair advantage over others. So pretty exciting stuff right there. There's been a number of tools in the past that kind of do this similar thing, but they're kind of clunky. They require you to, travel around using a third-party scanner or whatnot. And yeah, this sounds a lot more convenient. And since it requires that key, it also kind of ensures that this will in fact be available to the community at large, and not just the developer or the friends of the developer, so to speak. So very, very cool. Not to mention, this sounds like it'll kind of pave the way to additional APIs down the road for even more expansive features. So very nice. Okay, moving on to the new beacon feature, you now have a score called compactness, and this is a measure between essentially how many plots you're using, as seen right here, versus how many plots that either are being reserved or could be reserved. That would be the yellow kind of dotted grid over here. This is the beacon right here in the middle, with the yellow being the reserved area that it's not actually plotted, but nobody else can plot there except for the owner of this beacon. And as I stated before, this is a measure of this space, whether it's being reserved or not. So even if I turn this space off, it still is calculating this compactness score, and even for this road branching off of it, it counts towards this compactness even though the space isn't being reserved. So that's something to kind of clarify of what we're actually measuring here. And basically this is to prevent people from building structures that overly utilize the beacon reservation system, or this kind of yellow grid right here, in order to reserve massive amounts of land using a fraction of the plots. A good thing to note is that this system is completely two-dimensional and does not care about vertical plots or plots stacked on top of each other. It's only concerned about how the plots are spreading out horizontally. So let's take a little bit of a closer look at how this actually works. So right now I have several beacons kind of set up. So right here we have one beacon wide, essentially road or tail or whatever you want to call it, and it can go a maximum of 15 plots before the compacted stat essentially goes critical, and it actually prevents you from placing more beacons. Now if you notice, I have placed another beacon that I'm able to go another 15 plots. However, since this is deliberately circumnavigating kind of the system or whatever, this behavior is also banned, and if you're basically caught doing it, then first developers will contact you, try to get you to resolve it on your own. They'll give you pointers and try to help you out. If you just kind of ignore them or nothing happens, then they will actually take measures to correct the situation more directly. But moving along over here, we have essentially the same setup, except now we're 2 wide and we're able to extend 25 plots. It's also good to note that as your beacon becomes larger or your settlement becomes larger, these rules kind of lax more and more. Case in point, if we come over to this particular plotted area, we have a square that's 14 by 14, and by the way, a square is considered the perfect compactness. So if you're a rectangle using the same number of plots, you might have a lower compactness score just because of that shape. But since this has a 14 by 14 square right here, if we take a look, we can have a tail coming off of this plotted area that is actually longer than we would otherwise be able to have, which is all the way up to 26 plots long. So basically, as you have a settlement that grows or your beacon grows, you'll be able to have these kind of tails or tendrils coming out further and further if you want to build, say, bridges or any other particular reason why you might want to do such a thing. And jumping over here, let's take a look at another aspect of this system. And basically, shopping mall type situations really shouldn't be affected by this system pretty much at all. Right here I have a test setup of basically the worst case scenario, and that's somebody that wants to set up a completely open mall where basically they just plot a whole bunch of roads and there's some empty spaces for players to come and then freely plot their own shops. If you're trying to set up an organized mall, this is probably the worst way of doing it, but you can see here that by using a 3-wide road system, I'm still able to have 72 shop plots enclosed. That's 72 individual plots that players could plot for the shops. How I would probably prefer this to be set up is like each shop being 2 plots right here. But of course, since this is an open setup and players are free to plot whatever they like, you could literally have one player come and plot all of this space for one single shop. So really, the way to set up a mall would be to basically pre-plot the shopping areas or the shop areas. And then you could either remove the plots and allow other people to plot them, or delete the beacons. Like you could have each one of these its own individual beacon, especially if you wanted to already have a beacon there for them to use instead of making them provide their own beacon, etc. Or if you wanted, you know, a little mock kind of pre-setup for a shop that they could literally just move in and immediately start selling items. So what I'm basically trying to get around to saying is that it's not just your own beacon that affects compactness. Anybody can come in here and fill in this area, and that will also improve the compactness of this beacon right here. So this isn't just a beacon by beacon case, this is a settlement wide kind of compactness score. So in other words, I could greatly expand this mall if I go ahead and fill in these areas and then make them available to players later, or as the stalls fill up naturally by themselves. So, like I said, this is kind of the worst case scenario, and really this setup is more or less mimicking the problem that this system is aiming to prevent. So, really the fact that you can set up this much in this way is a little bit impressive to me and shows kind of how lax the system is currently. The system, or the balance of it, is a complete work in progress. The developers are requesting community feedback on this feature to basically properly balance it, and they've even made a web tool to essentially view the live servers, or at least a snapshot of the builds on the live servers, to kind of preview of like, where does your beacon stand with this compactness feature. And jumping over here, here is the tool that was released, so I'll throw the link in the description of the video along with all of the other relevant links. But here we have, let's see here, looks like lasagna. It's just the first planet that was loaded whenever I opened up this map, and as you can see, it's, well, a map of the planet, and these kind of blue chunks, those are beacons that are considered compact, whereas the orange ones are considered not compact. Up here at the top, we have kind of some guides on how to control it, so you can use like the plus and minus to zoom in and out. Zoom in and out of the map. We can also use the less than or greater than signs, or rather the comma and period keys, to up or lower the threshold. So if I up the threshold too high, more and more of these beacons will be considered not compact. And of course, by lowering the threshold, let's zoom in kind of down here, looking at this particular build as an example. Let's lower the threshold and see if we can kind of at least fix, there, we fixed that area. If we go even lower, we should eventually fix this kind of road right here, but presumably it's considered not compact because we've got this little branch over here and this kind of empty space in the middle here. So this could probably easily be fixed by filling this in here, maybe removing some of these tails and whatnot, but certainly it just looks like they're connecting whatever this is over here along with this kind of over to this area right there. So but certainly we have to lower the threshold to pretty darn low. This defaults to, we hit refresh, it'll go back to the default of 0.25. It took 0.08 for the threshold, and that's probably way too permissive to really have much an effect, but just kind of an example. And that literally looks like, is that a soccer field? That's pretty awesome. I'll have to go check that out. Yeah, that looks that looks pretty convincing of some sort of kind of sports field, so very nice. But we come over here and there is a drop down for all of the planets. If you take a look at Betulia, it's rather shocking just what is going on that planet. So yeah, here is an example of quite a bit of craziness going on over at Betulia. This area right in here, that's actually my build, so I have quite a bit of fixing to do basically. But just look at all of these roads dissecting the planet. It's just a little bit crazy. Not to mention we have areas over here that looks like they're just trying to reserve a large area of space. Same over here. And this really just doesn't leave a whole lot for new players to find a place to settle. There is like a nice little blank area over here, but whether or not that area even looks interesting to build is kind of another question. But I saw something over here. Oh, this right here. This kind of interests me because this looks like a very organic claim and doesn't exactly strike me as abusing anything. However, with the current threshold, it's considered not compact. So that concerns me a little bit. But again, if we kind of lower the threshold a little bit, how far? Yeah, it would have to go, yeah, 0.14. And that's pretty permissive. See, that even allows this over here, and that's kind of probably shouldn't be allowed, so I don't know. But coming back over to this lineup, let's take a look at some of the other behavior of the systems. So as I said before, a road that's 1 plot wide can go up to 15 plots long. That jumps up to 25 for 2 plots wide, 35 for 3 plots wide, and actually 45 for 4 plots. So basically each plot thickness gets you another 10 plots. I don't know how far that actually scales, but before we even get that far, there's some interesting other behavior to take note. So if you do 2 plots wide with 2 separate beacons, it doesn't have any difference. However, if you do the same thing but with a 4 plot wide road, this should only be able to go 45 plots long. However, since it's 2 different plots and this one is actually by 2 separate characters, you're able to go a total of 98 plots. So having things on separate beacons on separate players actually kind of synergizes to allow you to have even more lax rules, so to speak. And it's good to note that I tested this out with 2 different characters on the same account and did the same thing. It's just 2 different beacons on the same player. So there's really no difference between your alts or even your own beacons, other than you might run into an issue of like, oh, you're using multiple beacons just to extend your range, which is also against the rules. So in other words, exploiting this feature to be able to build a road all the way around the planet is, it's still against the rules. So all of these beacons I'm showing like the extreme of what you can push them to, and from my understanding, they are still valid configurations. However, if you are able to completely invalidate a configuration, and pretty much the only way I've found that you can do that is to say plot something that is dependent on another beacon, because if you're doing with just one single beacon, if you reach critical compactness, it stops you from adding more plots. Coming over here, as you can see, this plot tail goes greater than 15 plots, which is the maximum for a 1 wide plot. And if we remove this beacon over here, it will throw the compactness into the negative. There we go, remove that beacon. Now this beacon is no longer compliant with the new system, and we should get a notification almost immediately telling us urgent, the beacon map compactness is prohibited. It gives me a name of the beacon and the world that it is on. So if somebody removes their beacon and all of a sudden now my beacon is no longer compliant, I'll get a message so I can take matters into my own hands and fix it. If we come over to the beacon, we'll notice a few things. We have a message here under beacon issue. Beacon map compactness is prohibited. Prestige has been set to 0 whilst the beacon compactness is prohibited. All we have to do is fix the issue and we'll get our prestige back. And while this beacon has no prestige, it also means that it does not generate any footfalls. So it's kind of a little bit of an incentive to go ahead and fix it. They also mentioned that the plotting restrictions have been relaxed to help you correct the beacon compactness. You can add plots and gaps to fill in the beacon in between neighbors, or remove plots that extend away from the main part of your beacon. If the compactness is not restored, then a moderator may alter the beacon on your behalf. So in other words, if you just ignore this and say maybe it extend your beacon even farther, eventually somebody's going to come along and fix the problem for you. A good thing to note about beacons with prohibited compactness is that any reserved areas are still maintained while it's in prohibited compactness. However, if you add plots, that reservation area cannot be extended. So in other words, somebody can't come along and somehow invalidate your compactness in order to maliciously take away your plot buffer to claim yet more land. However, you can't deliberately throw your beacon out of compliance in order to extend your reservation area either. So right there is a nice bit of anti-abuse built right into the system. Okay, well I think that covers beacon compactness. Just a few thoughts. I have mixed feelings about different beacons actually kind of working together to go even further. On one side, this makes sense for settlements, like as the settlement grows and is comprised of many beacons, it's able to expand more freely. However, it's kind of also like it's going to encourage solo players that are basically building their entire town or an entire town for themselves to split their build amongst many beacons to have more relaxed rules. So it's kind of, I don't know, there's a balance to it. I don't know if we're quite there yet. Certainly there's any number of reasons for a solo player to have a really large build split amongst many beacons, particularly for layering permissions. It can be very handy. Say you want one group of players to be able to access just one part of your build, or have one part of your build dedicated to a guild, or say a private crafting area, etc., etc. So but certainly having your build spread across many beacons means you have many beacons to actually fuel, unless of course you have Gleam Club, and then it doesn't really affect much of anything. Anyway, I think that covers release 240 fairly well. This was Jiivita. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe if you want to see more like this, and if there's anything you didn't like, please let me know down below. Also, if you like my channel and want to get cool perks, check out my Patreon page. Until next time, peace.